I want to take a few moments to thank our veterans that are with us today, both physically and those who have gone on before us to form the great cloud of witness for the sacrifices made for our country. So please, if you served in the armed forces in any capacity at all, rise in body and spirit as you are able so that we may thank you. That's quite a few vets hanging out in here. I'm a veteran myself, and I don't always agree with the decisions to send troops into harm's way, but I always support the people who are at the mercy of those making the decisions. So I want to thank you for your service and your sacrifices. And as we celebrate Veterans Day tomorrow, I want you to go around, and if you see a vet, if you see somebody in uniform, if you see somebody wearing a hat that maybe they were a vet, tell them thanks. And you know, we don't even have to wait till tomorrow to do it. We can do it all year. And I ask you to do that. So thank you again to our veterans. Glorious days ahead. Will you pray with me, please? Creator God, I ask that the words of my mouth and the meditation of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight. And I welcome your Spirit as it rests upon us. These things we ask in your most holy name, Jesus Christ. Kathy, I think, said that the readings today were pretty awesome, the first two particularly. And I also like them. Charles Schultz's "Don't worry about tomorrow, the world coming to an end today. It's already tomorrow in Australia. You go, Charlie Brown. You know what the world's about." In the first reading, though, that provoked my mental juices into movement as I prepared for this morning. Live life so completely that when death comes to you like a thief in the night, there will be nothing left for the thief to steal. This quote really made me think about the concept of what it means to be fully alive. Though I know that my understandings about life have shifted over time and the years, from my teens to my 30s, I would say I was a perpetual Peter Pan. And my ideas of living centered around partying, doing wild and crazy things, and tempting fate by pushing life to its limits. And you know, now that I think about it, not a whole lot has changed. I just go to bed a little earlier. Really, I still do wild and crazy things, and I tempt fate, and I push life. I think maybe it's my drive and the purpose behind my life that has changed. In my estimation, Jesus certainly lived to the full potential of our reading. Jesus finds himself in yet another argument with the religious right. This time it is a different sect and deserves some explanation and exploration, which we'll do in just a minute. First, I want to set the scene. The reading for today falls within a series of discussions and confrontations between Jesus and the religious right. If this were a television series, the previous episode would have ended in something like "To Be Continued." And of course, there's a build-up in the last scene that heightens our anticipation for the coming week's conclusion. The opening scenes in our current story begins with a review of the highlights from the previous episode. So here is a recap of the events leading to the argument posed by the Sadducees. Jesus and his disciples have been making their way through Jerusalem, going through several cities in Samaria. and teaching the good news and healing as they go. They finally have made it to Jerusalem, and Jesus enters amid great celebration. It's a scene that is familiar to most all Christians and many non-Christians as well. It's a scene from the Palm Sunday liturgy. The multitude of disciples begin to praise God with loud voices. Blessed is the kingdom and the king who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace be in heaven and glory in the highest heaven. The jubilation caught the attention of some Pharisees, go figure. And so they sought to contain the exuberance and asked Jesus to stop the craziness. Jesus denied the request in a way, and what he did is he added insult to injury when he did so. Even if the shouts of celebration were quieted, the stones would shout out. Shortly following his entry into the city, Jesus goes to the temple and totally destroys the day's enterprises that support the temple worship. He overturns tables, releases livestock, drives everybody out. He cleaned house. It is this demonstration at the temple that sealed his fate in the minds of the religious elite and the Roman Empire. The cultural context here is that Jesus' actions threatened not only the worship practices of the temple, but it also threatened the political relationship between the Roman Empire and the Jewish elite. Jesus had acted up, and he needed to be removed so that a stable, though oppressive, system could continue to run without incident. Not only did Jesus make a stir in the countryside with his teachings and his boundary breaking and the behavioral concerns of the purity law, he was now challenging the business of running the temple and threatening the stability of the Roman Empire. It's a pretty powerful fellow. The search begins at this time in earnest to find a way to kill Jesus. Many queer Christians like myself find this passage very inspirational in our fight for human equality. I know I do very much. So it is here that we find our current passage within the context of religious conflict along with the political and economic fears of the elite and the empire. According to Luke's gospel, Jesus continued teaching in the temple even after his explosive demonstration. It is either during or following one of these sessions that the Sadducees confronts Jesus. But before we go there, I want to provide a little background on this particular religious sect of Judaism. I alluded to that earlier. The Sadducees did not believe in resurrection. In fact, it would have made more sense if the Pharisees had asked, because they did believe in the resurrective power of the righteousness. The Sadducees' indifference limited their sacred text to the Pentateuch, which is the Greek word for the Torah. According to Reverend Dwayne Davis, the senior pastor at MCC Minneapolis, the Sadducees understood this world to be the only world in which God would act as a keeper of the covenantal promises. That's important. The Pharisees understood that God would keep promises and enact justice even, and maybe even particularly, beyond the boundaries of this world, which was a good thing because Rome was not going to relinquish any control and certainly was not going to pay back for any of its injustices, end quote. Given the worldview of the Sadducees, their focus was on maintaining the status quo of the Davidic covenant as presented in the Torah. It was their belief that the kingdom would be visited upon the faithful in the world. Because they did not believe in the afterlife, it was important to maintain control and ownership of women and their sexuality, as illustrated in this reading. This view offers an explanation as to why it's important to know which man would control the woman. Control was necessary to maintain social order. It is these beliefs that frame the current argument and all of its absurdity. Here's the argument paraphrased. Teacher, Moses wrote for us, which is a dead giveaway that this is going to be a Torah question, that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife to read property, then the man shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother to control sexual activity hidden behind procreation. This argument continues as a woman is married to each of 7 brothers, which all die without providing children. Then the childless woman dies, leading to the question, whose wife will she be in resurrection? Again, Reverend Davis provides us with some insight into Jesus' response to this riddle. Jesus' answer to the riddle of the Sadducees does not address the what or the how of resurrection. Rather, Jesus places the focus on the life and the light of God's cosmic act of reconciliation and consummation. When all of creation is made new, when all of creation is transformed, when all of creation is resurrected, there will be an elimination of the present social, political, and economic arrangements with their associated brutality, injustice, and oppression, and the elimination of old systems, relationships, and categories of human experience that subjugate more vulnerable persons. A saying by the Reformed theologian and pastor L. Bertrand Bush sums it up. Death is the end of many things, but it's not the end of everything. In the Sadducees' way of thinking, this shift challenged the ownership of women because of Jesus' example that there is no ownership or exploitation of one in favor of another. All are alive and will be as angels and are children of the resurrection and children of God. There will be no more death because God is the God of the living. This text is rich with pearls. The first one is, for me, I was wondering, what does worthy mean in Jesus' response? This has all kinds of implications about good and bad and right and wrong and good and evil and heaven and hell and just and unjust, not to mention what happens when we throw our own individual egos into the mix. The argument that is posed in this passage alone is a sterling example of ego using any means available to control the environment for the benefit of the elite and privileged. There's a saying in AA that ego is edging God out. I think that's pretty significant here. There are parts of this passage, like this one, that I wrestle with, that's verse 35. Jesus said, "But those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead do not marry, nor are given in marriage." I'm not sure what worthy means and how to determine is one worthy or not. It's fraught with the binary issues listed above that lead to attempts to control the rest of the response and control the rest of the world. In addition to my 21st century understanding that says this could become exclusionary, it's something to ponder while keeping our ego in check. The second pearl I want to explore is the plight of women then and now. I also want to highlight women in the third world nations that continue to be oppressed 1 and 2 times over, sometimes 3. The Reverend Elder Dr. Mona West offered these thoughts concerning women in today's reading. Jesus sets the barren woman free from the Sadducees' limiting notion that even in eternity, if there is one, and this is her quote, she must be someone's property. He does this accordingly by allowing her to step into heaven herself, claiming that in the resurrection no one will possess another. Dr. West goes on to say that there are 21st century Sadducees here who want to control women's body and limit women's spiritual gifts to what is often canned as the traditional family values, and some who are quite literally would want to possess women as their property. She further noted that Jesus made it clear over and over again that he embraces barren women, promiscuous women, fallen women, prostitutes, I would dare say queer women and queer men, and women who still suffer social stigma, and women who are not defined by belonging to a husband. And unlike earlier prophets, there is not a story where Jesus induces fertility upon a barren woman. As I prepared for this sermon, it occurred to me that maybe the husbands were sterile and that was the real issue. You know, there's 7. Somebody should have had something going on there. But the stigma of being barren and childless was laid at the woman's feet. It was her burden. This leads to the final pearl that I want to explore. And that's the pearl of sex. I said it, sex. Is there life after death? Is there sex after resurrection? This question about whose wife will she be is more about sex and control than anything else. In the cultural context of this scripture, marriage is not just about procreation, and the Sadducees were very aware of what they were asking. Marriage was about ownership and property, along with controlling women's sexuality. The separation of sexuality and spirituality had not been totally instilled in the piety and religiosity of the time. There's another indication that this is about sex and sexuality, and it's the reference that Jesus makes to becoming like angels. The hearers of this message are familiar with the angels in Genesis that came down from heaven and had sexual relations with humans. In addition, to the Genesis story, there are many mythological stories of angels' interactions with human beings, sexually and non, that were common in the Greek literature. Hercules is probably one of the most notorious accounts that I can think of. It is unfortunate that sex for pleasure became synonymous with sin, and over time became completely separate from the possibility of a spiritually sexual encounter with the sacred. This, coupled with the weight of original sin being laid at woman's feet, leads to woman's sexuality being labeled as evil, resulting in the overwhelming need for man to control or conquer woman. So when Jesus intimates that not only will the woman be among those resurrected, her sexuality will also be freed, and she will be able to have encounters, sexual encounters with angels. I will leave you with this quote from Ronald Rallheiser. His book is Holy Longing. In heaven, unlike life here on earth, our sexuality will finally be able to embrace everyone. In heaven, everyone will make love to everyone. And already now, we hunger for that within every cell of our being. Listen to this. We are built to ultimately embrace the universe and everything in it. There are truly glorious days ahead. Thank you.